This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hello and welcome to Daughterhood, the podcast. I am your host, Roseanne Corcoran, Daughterhood Circle Leader and Primary Caregiver. Daughterhood is the creation of Ann Tumlinson, who has worked on the front lines in the healthcare field for many years and has seen the multitude of challenges caregivers face. Our mission is to support and build confidence in women who are managing their parents' care. Daughterhood is what happens when we put our lives on hold to take care of our parents. We recognize this care is too much for one person to handle alone. We want to help you see your efforts are not only good enough, they are actually heroic. Our podcast goal is to bring you some insight into navigating the healthcare system, provide resources for you as a caregiver as well as for you as a person, and help you know that you don't have to endure this on your own. Join me in Daughterhood. My guest today is Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor, Professor of Clinical Psychology and Psychiatry at the University of Arizona. She's also the Director of Clinical Training and a grief researcher. Dr. O'Connor shared such great insights the first time she was on the podcast. I'm so glad she's back to discuss her new book, The Grieving Body: How the Stress of Loss Can Be an Opportunity for Healing. Today, we discuss the physical nature of grief, the physiological response of your body, and how grief affects every system. We talk about our immune system, brain fog, ways to cope with grief, how to rebuild after loss, and so much more. I hope you enjoy our conversation. As caregivers, we become enmeshed with our care partners, not just as part of our lives and our schedules, but much like you say in the book, when you and me become bonded, our us is now a functional system, and our physiological systems, cardiovascular, endocrine, etc., are entwined, even though they operate in our separate bodies. And when one of those people are missing, the other one suffers. I mean, just unbelievable. So tell me, how does grief affect our bodies?
I think people are shocked by how physical the experience of grief is. I think it's not something we're really aware of in advance. And to some degree, I don't think, even if someone tells you that it will be a physical reaction, that's still very different than living with it in your body, isn't it?
Yes.
And so, I can tell you how grief will affect you from research studies over, actually at this point, literally millions of people. But it's also just really important to remember that what mostly matters is how it's affecting your body, right?
Right.
But nonetheless, let me tell you what we know from research. So one of the most clear pieces of research that has been shown in maybe the largest groups of people is that after the death of a loved one, someone to whom we are bonded closely, and in our research, that is very frequently a spouse, because it's very easy for us to track in research.
Right.
So what we know from research across, so many people now is that in the first few months after the death of a spouse, the remaining partner is 1.5 times more likely to die of a heart attack than someone who remains married during that same time. Now, the risk for men is actually a little higher than that. It's almost twice as high, the risk of a fatal heart attack. And for women, a little bit lower, closer to the 1.5%, 1.5 times. But most importantly, I think it lets us see that's a huge risk factor in the medical world, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it just really underlines how our bodies are entwined. And we really serve as this external pacemaker for each other.
Right.
And, we'll talk more, but it isn't only about the heart, as you said, it's other systems as well. But that's just perhaps that is the fact that keeps me doing the research. How do we figure out what is going on?
Right. Well, and it's so hard too, because especially with caregivers, it's tough to do any research with caregivers.
Yes,
We don't have that type of research.
that's right.
And it's unfortunate because there's so many of us and
Mhm.
we're all doing this, and then we feel terrible.
Yeah. I will say there's more. Yeah, there is more research now than ever before in caregivers, thank goodness, which is still not enough, but it
Right.
is the right direction.
Yeah.
And some of that is physiological research. So I think we are very clear now that providing caregiving has an impact on the immune system. I think that I don't think there is a scientist today who is current in the literature that is not clear on that.
Totally agree. And one of the sentences that you said that really struck me was part
Mm.
of the process of healing after the amputation of our loved one.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, that sentence there,
Yeah.
because
Right.
it is like losing a limb,
Yeah.
and trying to come back from that
Mhm.
while your body is changing. And
Yes.
that's really the interesting part, where because even your sympathetic nervous system, and you can't open a magazine or you can't go on social media without seeing somebody saying you can reset your sympathetic nervous system and all of that.
Yeah.
How does grief affect our sympathetic nervous systems, and how do
Mhm.
we go about trying to get it back?
So I think the thing that really stands out to me is human beings are incredibly resilient. So our bodies, for the most part, are able to absorb this blow, this incredible event, this incredible loss of our loved one. Our body is, for the most part, able to absorb that blow while our mind and heart try to figure out what just happened? What do I do now? How do I live in the world? For most of us, our body is the pillow that can absorb that shock.
Okay.
What that means is that our body might not work the way we're used to it working. We may have more stomach aches and headaches. Our throat may be tight. We may have crying jags that sort of amaze us in their depth. But keep in mind, this is the body's role, is to react and recover. Right? That's
Right.
just because we can't eat the way we used to, it doesn't mean there's something wrong per se. Nothing is broken. You know what I mean? The
Hmm.
functioning is coping with a lot, but it
Right.
doesn't mean there's something broken that needs to be fixed, but rather that our system needs time to adjust. Oh, wow, this is how to figure out how to go to sleep without this person next to me, right?
Right.
That's going to take lots of practice. That's going to take night after night after night of practice.
Hmm.
And I think there are times, clearly, if you have a heart attack, something has broken, right?
Sure. Sure.
So there are moments where this can go over into the level of physical malfunction that is significantly going to affect our health. But for the most part, keeping in mind, I can be aware of these physical symptoms. Gosh, I can be aware when my heart rate has really sped up if I pay attention, if I allow myself to know that about my own body. And the thing is, bodies are constantly evolving and reacting and recovering. So I don't think from my way of thinking about it, it's not so much that we need to reset something in our sympathetic nervous system, but that our body reaction to stress, waves of grief, and so forth, if we can be aware of it, then using that information, right? oh
Right.
gosh, this is a moment where I need soothing. Wow, I really need to find a way to calm myself in this moment. And, that looks different for different people. Some people will be like, oh my gosh, I need to go for a run. And another person says, oh, I need a hug, right?
Right.
Both of
Right.
those are changing your physiological state. And both of those are going to be good ways of coping when you realize, ooh, my body has gotten really out of whack because I'm thinking so much or feeling so much about my loss.
Hmm. No, I totally get that. And as what I was just popped into my head as you were saying that is,
Yeah.
I was a sandwich caregiver. So
Yes.
I was smushed
Oof.
right in the middle.
Ugh.
And, when you're doing that, the time that you spent thinking about, gee, how do I feel about this is
Right.
zero. I mean, it's
Exactly.
zero. You
That's
don't
it.
know how your body's working because you're literally just trying to survive. So then when the person that you're caring for passes, you're left with, okay, well, what is this feeling? I don't know what this
Yeah.
feeling is because I
Yeah.
haven't touched base with myself. So
Yes.
how do we try to work through that whole process of trying to get back on your feet, literally getting on your
Yes.
feet to be like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm standing. How do we
Mhm.
do this?
The reality is that each of us is doing what we have to do each day to get through whatever needs to happen that day, right?
Yeah.
Whatever is important to us that we are contributing to is what has to happen. And that can mean that avoidance or denial are appropriate coping strategies in moments, right?
Right.
And I am a big proponent of that. Now, if avoidance and denial are your only coping strategies, if they're the only tools in your toolkit, it's hard to fix a window with a hammer.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Hammer's a great tool,
It is.
just not for everything.
Right. Not the right
So,
tool. Yeah.
right. So I think about it in terms of having a big toolkit of coping strategies and on any given day, how you respond to your own emotions, the time you may or may not take to tune in to what you're feeling is going to be a part of a bigger set of goals that you have for that day. Um, what I would say is that, psychologists explain stress as being this balance between the demands of the world in one pan. If you think of those old timey balance scales. So the demands of the world in one pan and the resources we have to cope with them in the other pan. And stress is when they're not balanced, right? There's more
Yep.
demands than resources. And so part of what we might think about is how do I increase the resources that I have? How do I offer myself 7 or 8 hours for sleeping? How do I offer myself some healthy snack options if I don't have much appetite?
Mhm.
Do I remember to make my mammogram appointment and my regular annual checkup? Do I remember to go to the dentist? Right now, those may be things you've had to put off, understandably, as a caregiver. But now is the moment. Your body is coping with grieving. And, something like hypertension is going to be picked up on a regular, I'm just going to my primary care for my annual checkup. And so things like that will get picked up on a regular blood draw or a regular exam. And then you'll cope with those if that happens to be the issue. So I do think about it in terms of what are our coping toolkits like? When do we use which strategy? And can we try to use a bunch of different strategies at different moments? How do we increase the resources? And then something I think women and caregivers are particularly poor at, how do I decrease the demands? And sometimes that's just the perception of demands, right? Like what counts as a demand. You shouldn't send your child to school in the same clothes 2 days in a row. You should not eat cereal for dinner, right? These demands that we have are sometimes put on ourselves and trying to decrease those demands a little bit. If it's a vitamin fortified cereal, maybe cereal for dinner is not the end of the world.
Right. 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 Nobody's going to turn to stone. Right.
No, exactly.
Well, and it's interesting too, because the physiological stress also affects our immune system. So it's like you want to make these appointments to get back to the doctor, but your system is kind of doing the jig here.
It is.
So how does it affect our immune system and our
Yeah.
ability to fight viruses or even, just a cold, like anything,
Yeah,
which is a virus,
that's
but
right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do. The immune system is such an intelligent system in our body. I mean, I've studied the brain, and I think the immune system rivals the brain in its complexity and its capacity, right?
Hmm.
So, what we know from literally decades of research, very sparse research, a few studies a decade for a while, and now increasing research, what we know is that during grieving, inflammation increases in our body, and that, of course, affects all of our organ systems.
Hmm.
We know that our ability to fight viruses decreases. And so I'll give you a simple example. A study was done of older adults who were recently widowed. And what they discovered was that the regular vaccine, your flu shot in the fall, was not as effective in widowed older adults compared to married older adults. Now, that doesn't mean you don't get your flu shot. Obviously, it still provides protection. But what it suggests is that our immune system is really coping with a lot. And so this may be a time when we're more cautious about, the environments that we find ourselves in, wearing a mask, whatever it is, because we know the fact is that our on average our immune systems are having a harder time coping. I'll give you another example that might really resonate with your listeners. In the new book, the Grieving Body, I talk about my good friend Lizzie Pickering, who has written a book about her son who died at 6 of a genetic disorder. And after Harry died, Lizzie got pneumonia again and again and again. And she realized that this was a part of her grieving reaction. What was important was that she gets to the doctor and she gets antibiotic for pneumonia, right?
Yeah.
Because that can go in a bad direction. And what's also interesting is lung difficulties run in her family, right? So we are often dealing with whatever is the sort of weak point in our body that's pre-existing, either in our own personal history or our family history. And so Lizzie realized, oh my gosh, I have to do things differently because my lungs are really compromised right now. And she started doing yoga every morning and really focusing on how do I breathe deeply and how do I tune in the morning to discover what can my body do today? What is even possible for me to do today? And this has made a significant difference. So she had these bouts of pneumonia for years, and she hasn't had to take antibiotics now for a very long time. So this is the process of understanding your body is having a reaction, your immune system is struggling more. And then what can we do about that? How can we respond, tune in and respond differently? And in a funny way, the subtitle of the book is how the stress of loss can be an opportunity for healing, because we can learn how our individual body and our individual relationship loss affects us.
Yeah, and that's really the fascinating. There's so much fascination for me in this book. There's so many things that are fascinating. I can't speak highly enough about this book. But when we're looking at this, how long, and I know that it's subjective and I don't mean to, pinpoint it here, but how long does that process take? Are we talking, is it 6 months? Is it 18 months? Is it 3 years? Like how long?
The research helps us here as well.
Mhm.
There are definitely acute effects that are happening in the first few days and weeks. For example, you're 21 times, well, one study shows you're 21 times more likely to have a heart attack on the day that a loved one dies than any other day of your life.
Wow.
21 times more likely. So
Wow.
there's this acute reaction, and then that starts to taper off, right? So the risk goes down pretty quickly and pretty dramatically. But that kind of risk in the first 3, 6 months is something we see in the research. Now, for most of us, by 6 months, our blood pressure has returned to baseline, our heart rate has returned to baseline, and even cortisol, our stress hormone. So, on average, for most of us, our stress hormone has returned to baseline as well. But there are these longer term effects as well that seem to be also at play. And those can affect us for years. And so we know mortality rates, they're not that high, but they are higher than married people, for example, in the first even 4 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and in some instances, even when we look at lifetime histories of loss. Now, that's not all doom and gloom information, although it sounds
Okay.
like it, right?
Yeah, I'm like, wow, we got to, start breathing or something. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. The reason I say that is as we learn how to adapt, as we learn how to restore a meaningful life, those experiences of love and connection and joy and pride in how we took care of this person who was dying, connection with maybe our siblings or our close friends who are also going through this experience, those positive emotions have really strong physiological effects as well.
Mhm.
And so we can use those in part to rebuild in the body, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's an important piece to remember. And also that living things take time to adapt and grow. There's a tradition in some Native American nations, for example, in the Cherokee Nation, where they will cut off their braid when a loved one dies. And you think about how long it takes for your hair to grow back, right?
Yeah.
And that's a totally normal process. And no one says to you, why isn't your hair growing faster? Right?
Right.
What's
Exactly.
wrong with you?
What's wrong with you?
Why
You're
isn't your
doing
hair
this
growing?
wrong. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think keeping in mind, I mean, it's years, isn't it? Right? I've
It
had
is.
long hair. You've had long hair.
Absolutely.
And it takes years to grow hair back, and that's a totally normal process. So I think remembering this is a normal process that, for the most part, my brain and my body know how to do. We just have to be patient as it happens.
Ooh, I love that. I mean,
Yeah,
that's because it's so true. And, nobody gets to tell you how you feel.
that's right.
You're not working off of somebody else's timeline.
No, you're not.
And the relationships that we have with our care partners are ours,
Yes.
and we know how deep they were.
Yes.
So that explanation is beautiful, and it gives you that it can't just happen like that.
Mhm.
It can't just
That's
happen
right.
overnight.
That's right. We honor that our body is a part of that relationship, along with our mind and our spirit and our emotions and our thoughts.
It's amazing. It's funny too because, and for those of us who, first of all, I would love to have a adult children who care for their parents study. Just putting that out there
Yes.
for you. But
Yes.
you know,
Agreed.
I don't know how you make that happen, but that's just throwing it out there. But for
Yes.
those of us who were dementia caregivers,
Yes.
experiencing that brain fog that happens
Mhm.
after
Mhm.
the death of
Mhm.
your person is very unsettling.
Terrifying.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
how long is that the same process? Because, then you start thinking, oh boy, oh
Yeah.
no, here we go.
Yeah.
But like, how is that the same process of it just takes as long as your hair grows out? Like it just takes that long.
Mhm. It is. And I would say this. So, interestingly, risk for dementia is not one of the things that we see increased after the death of a loved one.
That's good.
Right. So we see increased cardiovascular disease, we see increased risk of infection, various other systems. But there's a study that has looked at different causes of bereavement related morbidity, and it turns out dementia is not one of them. So that's interesting in and of itself, just as a fact to squirrel away,
Mhm.
when you're panicking.
Right.
But more importantly than that, many bereaved people experience what we call brain fog. And the first thing to know is that brain fog actually means something different to every person, right?
Right.
So I can't remember people's names. I don't know why I came into this room, what I was supposed to be doing. I don't know how I got home from the grocery store. All of those are actually distinct cognitive processes. But for the person who's experiencing them, they all feel like I can't use my mind, right?
Right.
So the important thing to know is the way I said there's a difference between difficulty in functioning versus something is broken in your body.
Right.
This is a similar distinction. Your brain on the back burner is coping with so much new information as you try to walk through this world without your loved one. And that is going to slow down the processing that's trying to happen in the foreground, right? When your CPU, when your computer is backing up, your Word document looks a little weird as you're trying to type on it, right?
Right.
There's
Yes.
nothing technically wrong with the computer. Everything's just slowed down a little bit. And that is a little bit more like the analogy we might use. I'm not encoding where I parked my car because my brain is thinking about something else on the back burner. So, no, of course I can't find my car when I come back to the parking lot, right? This is a different process than what we see in dementia, where there is something that is breaking in the brain, where there's something interrupting those neural connections, right?
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that distinction makes a little bit of sense. It's not that you're making up your symptoms. You are feeling brain fog, but it is a process of there's more demands on your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, as that becomes less problematic for you, as you adjust and restore and adapt, that there are fewer demands and you will go back to using your mind a little bit more the way you're expecting.
Okay. That's comforting.
Yeah, I hope so, because it is terrifying.
It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And it's, your body's not working in the way that you're expecting it to work.
Yeah.
And then your brain's not working in this way that you're expecting.
Exactly.
And then you feel like, you talk about motivation in the book
Yeah.
too. There's that lack of motivation that just makes you go like, I'm good. Just let me
Yeah.
sit here.
Absolutely.
I mean, all of that process is a lot for us to handle as people. I mean, how do we try to find our way through that, especially the motivation part?
Yeah. It's funny, in our culture, we've lost a little bit of the grief literacy, I think, that we have had in previous generations.
Yes.
Part of wearing black, which I'm not suggesting we all go back to wearing black solely for the purposes of, widowhood or bereavement.
Mm-hmm.
But part of the reason was just to sort of gently and without words communicate, hey, I'm not myself right now.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
And part of not being yourself is I don't really feel like socializing, or I have no motivation to finish this stupid thing at work that I'm supposed to be doing.
Yep.
And on the one hand, that does feel like a lack of motivation. On the other hand, bereavement can really reveal what is important to us, right?
Yes.
These are the things that are worth it. And frankly, these are the things that aren't worth it. And I'm just not willing to do those anymore, right?
Yes.
It's sort of like, teenagers are great. What do I want to say? Teenagers are great detectors. And what I mean by that is, often they ask questions like, well, why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And bereavement in a way has some of that too. Why am I bothering? If life is short, if we don't know what's coming, why am I doing this? And in the short term, that's just devastating, right? That prevents you from doing anything.
Right.
But in the long term, it's a part of wisdom. Why am I doing this? What is my goal here? And is this worth my limited energy or time? And that in the long run can be quite useful.
Totally agree with you. And I really think when you come out of caregiving,
Yes,
because, it's not just the caregiving experience, and then it's the end of life experience.
that's right.
Which is another section.
Yes,
When you come out from all of that, it changes you.
it does. And it should.
And it should. Yes.
You know, it's such, I think your listeners will agree. Caregiving is many things. One of them is it is an honor to see how someone goes through this process, to see that up close and intimately.
Mhm.
And there are very few opportunities actually in our lifetime to experience another person going through this and to learn from how they did it. My mother and my father each approached death very differently because they were very different people. And my relationship with each of them was very different. And I will tell you, I am so grateful for having had those experiences as I think about approaching my own end of life. May it be far from now.
Yes.
And so I think if we are willing to allow this unwanted knowledge,
Mhm.
if you can say it that way, to allow this unwanted knowledge to be absorbed, it in the long run makes you a wiser and more empathic person.
I agree. And we have to be open to that
Yeah.
and be okay with that knowledge,
Yeah.
really,
Mhm.
because we take it with us.
That's right.
There's you hit on a big emotion, which is
Mm.
guilt.
Yes.
And guilt, much like grief, runs through caregiving. And what you said is it's often about leaving out aspects of the situation to assign blame to ourselves or others,
Yeah.
which is just other level thinking here. I have to tell you. So, um, how do we deal with that? And is that
Yeah.
the opposite of acceptance of our grief?
Hmm. Oh, I like the way you phrase that. Hmm.
Thank you.
Well, having I love these conversations, Roseanne. You're so interesting and thoughtful.
Thank
In any
you.
case,
Thank you.
I I have been struck by the way that when someone has those guilt thoughts rolling around and around and around in their head, which has such big impacts on our mood and our motivation and our sense of self, our self-esteem, that often what I hear people saying, yes, is this very narrow description of something that happened, right?
Mhm.
That I didn't do this other thing, or I didn't do it soon enough, or I didn't ask the doctor to do that, or even I think the flip side, kind of a sense of blame as well. My sibling should have done this. The doctor could have known that this was going to happen. And when we frame a story of what has happened in these narrow terms, and it leads to such strong feelings, I sometimes ask myself, could I take a bird's eye view? Could I think about this situation now from a bigger perspective? And that can be, let's widen the time frame, right? Let's
Mhm.
think about all the hundreds of millions of things you did right?
Yeah.
That made your loved one's illness go better than it could have. Let's add those in. Or let's widen the time frame of people.
Mhm.
Let's think about, other than you, all the additional people whose role it was to contribute, right?
Mhm.
And that meaning it's not only your fault that something happened. And then the last one I think about is, so there's time and there's people that we can sort of add to the equation, but also just emotions, right? So here's this one thing that I said when I was really at the end of my rope. Now let's add in all the other emotions, all the other moments that I kissed them and that I rubbed their back and that I expressed how much I love them and how much gratitude I have toward them. Let's add all those in as well. And sometimes if you have this then bigger story, the guilt doesn't take center stage. And that allows you to then feel more self-esteem or more agency in your life now, or even more connection to others. We were all struggling to deal with this impossible situation, and those feelings of pride and joy and connection, along with the existing grief and guilt and blame, that's human existence, is having all the feelings.
Right. Right. I love that perspective. That's great because you get stuck in that.
You do.
And it's not fair.
Widen the lens. And it's not fair, right?
Yeah.
And most of all, what I like to think about is whether or not this statement is true. I should have gotten to the hospital sooner. Whether or not that statement is true, is it helpful to make that the center of what you're thinking about?
Right.
You know?
Yes.
So this is a maybe more practical way to think about widening the lens. When I'm having that thought, what else can I do? Who else can I add? What other time frame can I add? And what other actions that I took could I add to that story?
Right. Right. And it's almost like when in the grieving brain, when you talk about the subjects that you had put through, you had them think about an upsetting image and then replace it with a positive image.
Mm-hmm.
And that always sticks in my brain because I think you can use that across the board with anything.
That's
and
right.
Is that someplace where we could insert that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, many thoughts when we're grieving feel totally uncontrollable, right?
Right.
Like I'm sitting at a stop sign and I'm suddenly in tears, nothing is happening. Why is this coming to me now? Right.
Right.
Well, it turns out the brain actually does that a lot of the time. It sends us little push notifications all the time. It's just that these are very upsetting push notifications, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that there's necessarily something wrong with us. This is just the process. It's just that these are very upsetting instances of it. But I think it can be helpful to people to come to understand, oh, but I could add to my thoughts right now, or I could touch into what's happening in my external world instead of my internal world, right? What am I literally seeing out the window at this moment? What am I feeling, on the seat of my chair? By adding thoughts, sometimes that's an easier way to cope with these intrusive thoughts and images than trying to get rid of them, which I can tell you is not how the brain works.
Right. Right. It's like trying to say, don't think about zebras. Oh, okay.
Exactly.
All you think about
now
is
we're all
zebras.
thinking about zebras.
Right. Exactly.
But you could add, can I put unicorns in with those zebras right now? And now your thoughts have changed, haven't they?
Yes, they have. Yes, they have.
That's
I
right.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's something that's easy because I think we get hung up in well, geez, I don't know how to make this better for myself. I don't know how to support
Yes.
myself. And we think
Yes.
so big and out
Yeah.
there somewhere instead of
Mhm.
it's really present moment.
It really is. These are the things to tuck away in your toolkit.
Right. Next to the hammer.
That's right.
Exactly. Now, I know, grief is different for everyone.
Yeah.
And the length of grief is different for everyone. But how long before it becomes an issue, like prolonged grief?
Yeah. I really think about the trajectory that we're on. So, my favorite recent analogy to this is, think about the stock market, right? Stock market goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down. You can visualize that image, can't you? Right? You can have the
Yeah.
worst day of trading with this horrible drop in the stock market. And yet, lo and behold, at the end of the year, could be that the stock market's up, right?
Right.
I think of grieving trajectories, and when we draw graphs in grief research, this is actually what we're looking at, is the way that things go up and down. And then over time, are things in an improving trajectory or a stuck trajectory where there's no up and down over the long term?
Okay.
So what we know from research is that in the first few months, there's so much up and down that we have no idea what the trajectory is going to be like for any given individual who walks into our clinic or our lab or whatever. There's so much variability in their emotional dial. Now, round about a year, we start to see that there are these trajectories that separate where we can suddenly see, gosh, if you're a person who, despite the ups and downs day to day, if you're a person who has been on a trajectory of experiencing fewer waves of grief, not none, just fewer, or are having more ability to accept, yes, this has happened, as difficult as it is, I forget less that this hasn't happened or that this has happened,
Yeah.
So if you're if you're on that trajectory, it doesn't really matter what your grief severity is on the day you come in. But I know that if you're on that trajectory around a year, you are likely to stay on that trajectory. This does not mean grief will go away. It's, change over time. And then there's another group of people, but thankfully a very small number of people, maybe 1 in 10 bereaved people, where they come in and it's like it's just happened. There's just been no change in the trajectory, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, for this group of people, we can start to predict, they haven't built a toolkit yet that is helping them. And fortunately, good targeted evidence-based psychotherapy can help them to build that toolkit, not to take away the grief. Unfortunately, that's just not going to happen, but to get them back on the typical trajectory that we see in most people, where there's improvement over time. And I don't even want to say improvement. There is building around the grief with these other positive experiences like joy and love.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And, I know that you talk about relaxation and
Yes.
and meditation. And,
Mhm.
we hear that a lot. And
Mhm.
it really does make it a difference
Mhm.
in how your body reacts. Now, you're the
Mhm.
scientist. You tell me why why the practice of sitting and breathing deeply can
Yeah.
absolutely change you.
Mm. It turns out that no one has gotten the message in our body that neurology and psychiatry and cardiology are in different departments.
Right. Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It
Yep.
turns out that for our body and brain, those are all completely interrelated. So, what's amazing about knowing that is that there are lots of different doors into changing our state, right? Changing our
Okay.
mood, changing our thoughts, and changing our physical state. Yeah. So, one of the doors in is actually deep, they say diaphragmatic breathing, right?
Mhm.
Breathing so your belly sticks out. That kind of breathing we know changes your physiology, drops your heart rate, drops your blood pressure, increases your vagal tone. Um, and importantly, when those things happen, often the consequence is that our thoughts slow down. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, imagine that.
Imagine that. And
Mhm.
so when we sit and we're having a lot of intrusive, repetitive thoughts, many people will become frustrated if they're trying to do something with their thoughts. But it is often the case that we can continue to turn our attention back to our breathing because our breath is constantly changing, isn't it? Like you're either inhaling or you're exhaling. Where are you at in this moment, right?
Right, right.
And that as those thoughts come, you can continue to be like, oh, yes, I'm back to thinking again. Let's see if I can direct my attention to breathing. The reality is if you're trying to count your breaths from 1 to 10 and you just get to one over and over and
Mhm.
over again,
Mhm.
you've still helped your body because you're still moving your attention back to your breathing, right?
Right.
So I think it is helpful to realize that the body can be a doorway into which we can, change this whole system that is our self, mind, brain, and body. Yeah.
Right, right. That's fascinating. Now, would that help avoid the dying of a broken heart?
This is a wonderful question, and we don't have an official answer yet.
Okay.
but,
All right.
what I can tell you, if we want to fund that study together, let's talk after the show, right?
Okay, you got it. You got
but
it.
but more importantly than that, we know that these types of deep breathing exercises uh, can help with physiological stress responses in lots of contexts, including bereavement. There's a study from my own lab where we looked at what's called progressive muscle relaxation, which instead of focusing on the breath, you're focusing on tightening and then relaxing each of your groups of muscles. And we saw that this actually had, doing this over 6 weeks in a group training, allowed widows and widowers to feel less grief over time, right? By doing this physical practice. So we know that this works in this context. We don't know for sure, as in we don't have the study that's looked at the broken heart phenomenon in the context of one of these studies. And part of the issue is, keep in mind, some of the physical effects, some of the grieving body is a long-term process. So something like learning relaxation might help over months, say. And many of the broken heart consequences are very acute, something that happens right after a death. So obviously you're not going to learn meditation one day after.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
Although it can be helpful to learn some of these skills in advance, right? Whether or not you'll be able to use them, at least you'll have more awareness of your physical state when a loss is just happened.
Okay. That's really a fascinating phenomenon. And I don't like, it's not a good way, but like it's wild that would actually, and I get it. You know, you can feel it. You feel how you feel.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that's, it's an ad for calling your doctor. Should you feel something that doesn't feel right?
That's right. That's exactly right. You have to take those symptoms seriously, because we know that those are real consequences of acute bereavement. There is nothing to feel silly about going to the emergency room if a loss has just happened and you are feeling cardiovascular symptoms, arrhythmia, pain, something like that. There's nothing wrong with going to the emergency room because we'd rather know. We'd rather know that you're not the one who is twice as likely to die of a heart attack,
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, how?
But
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I just wanted
to
give one last thought here.
Yeah.
So I have a very close friend who, when she does yoga, she feels really angry.
Really?
Like, it's just frustrating to her. It just does not work for her. And so my point here is, whatever tool you're using, you have to tune in and say, does this actually make my body feel better? For her, yoga actually makes her feel worse, right? So all the research studies in the world are not going to help yoga work for her. So you have to know what works for you, what makes your heart rate come down, what makes your breathing deepen, what makes you feel soothed.
No, that's funny. It makes her angry. That's great. Well,
Isn't that a riot?
Yeah, because if it's not going to help you, you're standing there in tree
Exactly.
pose, like, I hate this. I don't know why I'm doing that. That doesn't help you.
Heart rate's through the roof, and now you
Yeah.
have to hold on to that, yeah.
No. Talking about rediscovering our purpose. How do we go about that? And when do we start trying to do that?
Great question. Boy, if only I had the exact answer for you, right?
Yeah, I know.
On day 37 and a half, you
Right,
should
right.
open Khalil Gibran's The Prophet and begin. No,
Like a passage.
no,
Yes.
I make light, but I think what I'm realizing is that across our lifespan, many of us will wrestle with big questions like, why am I here? And what is my purpose? And what happens to us after we die? And there's a way in which knowing that those are universal human questions, first of all, makes us feel like we're in good company. There's nothing wrong with you because those questions have come to you now that you've, gotten to witness death up close and personal. And I think that wrestling with some of these questions about our existence, it's a lifelong process. It is the ultimate continuing education. So as we have new experiences, our answers to those may change over time. But what I find incredibly important is that lots of other human beings have thought through some of the answers to these questions. So going to your favorite podcast / author / pastor / yoga teacher and saying, hey, can we have a conversation about how you think about these questions can be adding to the resource pan of our scale, right? If I have a way to think about what is happening to me and why, what my purpose is in life, if I have a big picture way of thinking about that, that's going to help me even in the moment where I'm like, do I go to the bake sale that I thought was important or not?
Yes.
So I think knowing that our quest for meaning never ends, that's not brand new when a loved one dies and it has no expiration date. We will continue to figure out, what does it mean for us to have freedom? What does it mean for us to know our loved ones will die? What does it mean for us that we are given an unknowable amount of time to do some things on earth? Those are ongoing questions. And I think what's difficult is when we don't have people we want to share our vulnerable questions with, we don't get the benefit of what they've thought through before.
Yes.
I work with some young people, what we call opportunity youth. They are, disconnected from work or school for various reasons. Often they've been in foster care system or juvenile justice system. And we realize that often it was the death of someone close to them that kind of took them off track. And we do grief support groups with them. And many of them have never expressed to anyone how it felt when a cousin died or their best friend died. And I genuinely don't know how you understand what's happening inside of you if you don't connect with other human beings who have had this experience to know what's been happening inside of them. And I can tell you from the impact that these groups have for these young people, it is tremendous. Their coping toolkit, grows exponentially. And their capacity to watch out for each other also grows exponentially. So I do think there's a way in which these questions about the meaning of life have a role in what we do day to day.
And that's part of this.
That's right. That's right.
It's not there's not something wrong with you that all of a sudden you're like, what is this? Why am I here? What am I doing? What's next for me? Like, these questions have to be answered.
That's right.
After coming through what you just came through.
That's it. Exactly. And will not be the same answers as before you had this experience. It's a life-altering experience to care for someone and to experience their death. Yeah.
Yep. Never leaves you.
Never leaves you.
Well, I could talk forever with you. Do you have thank you. Do you have any final words for a family caregiver who's listening?
I think it is attuning to where you are at this moment, attuning to where your loved one is at this moment, kind of seeing that those might be in different places, but thinking about the small things you can do to contribute to the overall health of the we that you are. That means your health and their health. Thinking about that and giving yourself some grace and compassion when things don't go the way you expect them to. You are one piece in a big network. And fortunately, that network includes Roseanne's podcast. So keep listening.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor. And as always, a big thank you for being my guest today. For more information about Dr. O'Connor, visit maryfrancesoconnor.org, and you can find her new book, The Grieving Body: How the Stress of Loss Can Be an Opportunity for Healing, at a bookstore near you. Want more Daughterhood? We are more than the podcast. We are a community that offers free, nationwide, virtual support groups we call circles. These circles allow you to connect, learn, and receive that much-needed support through your caregiving journey. You can find more information at daughterhood.org, where you can register for a circle, sign up for our newsletter, find our founders blog, and of course, the podcast. Remember to also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Daughterhood. I hope you enjoyed our podcast today. Head over to daughterhood.org and click on the podcast section for show notes, including the full transcript and links to any resources and information from today's episode. You can find, subscribe, and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at Daughterhood. There you can discover our various circles and subscribe to our newsletter for updates. Feel free to message me on any of these sites and let me know what issues you may be facing and would like to hear more about. Or even if you just want to say hi, I'd love to hear from you. Also, a very special thank you to Susan Rowe for our theme music, the instrumental version of her beautiful song, Mama's Eyes, from her album, Lessons in Love. I hope you found what you were looking for today. Information, inspiration, or even just a little company. This is Roseanne Corcoran. I hope you'll join me next time in Daughterhood.